Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Zoo. Dr. Zoo on Monday, 18th of May, 2026. Just a touch over 4 o'clock. In fact, it's touched over twice. It's 4:02 p.m. 4:03. Look at that. We just lost another minute. But we are back in business. If we can get a little standardized tick that you guys can hear Dr. Zoo, that would be a fantastic as well. At least if one person hears it, then we know what's going on. Know that there are no dramas, no issues. If you can hear Dr. Zoo right now. Fantastic. Well done, guys. Well done. That's awesome. Now, we had a nice email that was sent out on the weekend, just as another little update here for everybody on the situation with the new Facebook Fridays. Facebook Fridays. Fantastic. Good to see everybody on board. Welcome, Canberra. Welcome, Perth. Fantastic to see. Loud and clear. That is beautiful. Now, a little email. If you didn't get it, please check your emails with support@zutopia.com. That one came from Zutopia. We have a different crew that are going to give you the fast bullet point updates on Fridays. They've been going out for a few weeks now, and they're all listed on the Facebook page of Zucoins. So there is a link in that email, and Friday's one, which went out on Saturday, that email in particular, is all about steering your attention to at least just following Zucoins on Facebook. There won't be anything on Instagram, and don't think the boys are going to do anything on X or any of those sort of channels. They're certainly not doing anything on TikTok. I can't sing mainly. So it'll be just the little updates on Fridays, Facebook Fridays. 2 points. It talks about the back engine stuff that's still being ongoing all the time with the Zucoins wallet. And it also talks about the latest with Zutopia, which then led into, obviously, the AUSTRAC, the big news on AUSTRAC last week. Well, which is, yeah, that's been a good week, actually. I've spoken to another representative of AUSTRAC on Friday, and they're very, very good bunch of people. One of the rare breed, I would suggest, in terms of government, because they do want to be very helpful, transparent and helpful. So we've got here Quirky Chatter. Unfortunately, I don't have Facebook. That's okay. Then you can continue to listen to Dr. Zoo twice a week, as you know, Mondays and Thursdays. You can certainly get the Zoo AI updates. There's going to be another Zoo update, Zoo AI, going out tomorrow. It's just a refresher generally for the, well, it's for the general public, really, which will be on Article 32, which is a summary of the AUSTRAC situation. And also, if you get the chance, just have a look at the announcement that was made by AUSTRAC on the 8th of May. There's a link there as well. And that announcement really was pretty big by AUSTRAC, because they've got a lot on their plate. There's a lot going on with AUSTRAC. In fact, if I just drag it up now, we'll just double check that, because people don't want to read anything, but it's important if you get a bit of a handle on. Let's have a look. AUSTRAC, certainly on the 8th of May, as I recall. Dr. Zoo recalls that. And here it is here. Yeah, the steps that they're taking, which they pushed themselves based on the changes that we indicated, which came out of left field from us as well. That is Zutopia. It's not a bad thing, people. In discussions, they're pretty keen. AUSTRAC will do one of two things, just as a refresher here as well. One is they will either, they can reject the application and simply state that you're not required to register with AUSTRAC, which is a plus. That just saves a lot of costs and means that Dr. Zoo's got a few extra bob in the pocket. Probably buy another couple of horses with that instead of spending the next round of $1 million or so on compliance. Don't underestimate the cost of compliance, people. It is horrendous. That was where the earlier easy bonds days had come from, the compliance in relation to remittance licensing, etc., which in fact that was still in place and still is, and that's given us a bit of an edge with registration, given the Zutopia falls under the easy bond banner for that reason. Now, It's not cheap. It's quite expensive. So that's the first outcome. The second outcome, which is starting to get Dr. Zoo excited, is actually being registered, despite the millions plus cost that's going to incur. At the end of the day, it'll be worn by the consumers, because that's how the world of compliance works. Government takes money from institutions for the compliance and issues penalties. For example, like Westpac. Now, just so you know, this is interesting. Well, let's get back to the update from AUSTRAC first, people. So the first thing is, AUSTRAC announced a 2-targeted campaign in Australia for virtual asset sector, which is the landmark Australian anti-money laundering reforms, which is going to shape the way Australia sits in the world of these virtual asset businesses, of which that's what the Zutopia program's about. They were previously known as digital currency exchanges, which certainly Zutopia didn't fall in, because we don't have anything to do with custodialship of coins, and certainly the money goes directly from buyer to seller. As you guys are well aware of how that works, with the success we've had in the soft launch, was certainly with Stripe, and particularly with the 3DS that confirms it. Now, it'll be odd, I've got to say, that if the banks are doing their job and they're identifying customers correctly with KYC and compliance and source of monies and all that sort of bits and pieces, if that's the case, then when you're a buyer, you go through the grill with the bank. The bank should know what it's doing, and the bank should put in train those outcomes. If the seller is also fully bank compliant, it would be a bizarre outcome if you then need another third party over and above Stripe to have to work out whether you're a good or bad person with the compliance issues, given that it's going from bank to bank account. It's a bizarre situation, but again, making arrangements, which is that definition that we talked about, can still drag Zutopia back in and then create the registration. But looking at it, if that's the worst case and there's a few bob required to pull that in, now that won't change the timing, because the boys are doing a great job at the back end over the weekend, still on this iOS thing, and getting to the pointy end of that. But it might be, sometimes they say the AUSTRAC could be a couple of weeks, sometimes they say it could be the full 90 days. And in fact, we hope they don't come back looking for more information, because we've given them pretty big, powerful wad of information on how Zutopia works, that they can make a pretty or relatively quick decision. But if they made a decision in a couple of weeks, then that green button would be switched on, and we then can announce to the world, and we would put up, obviously, the registration as part of that. It does have some incredible ramifications if Zutopia does get registered, because we do have 2 exemptions already. One is the Zoo tokens that we talk about from merchants. That's the Zucas tokens. They're not caught by this provision, so they're exempt. So when a merchant creates that token, people, and you go hunting and collecting, or you get it dropped to your phone, which is a huge, big parcel of the Zoo vision, which is Article 31, that program is important, because that's the connect that we want with merchants globally and customers long term. And in the short term, we're interested in getting through the foundation of the success of the whole program in terms of SplitChain and Zucoin wallets, and the speed and efficiencies that we do get a substantial return on the pricing, as in the price of the coins themselves. But long term, there is a far grander vision, which is about millions of merchants onboarding and millions of customers, and of course, steering merchants away from worrying about advertising in the normal sense, either through AI or Google, Instagram, and all those sort of bits and pieces, Meta, and pushing that into the value of delivery for consumers, which is these tokens. So they're exempt. And if a merchant does create like an example, $20 token, and that's fractionalized with a Zucoin, and that's out and about, then the person that ends up getting that can either redeem it, that is, go back to the merchant, or can go on and add it to Zutopia for trading with someone else. That also is exempt. Now, that has some really, really good stuff that can flow on the back of that. In fact, we had our normal team meeting with the great man, Robert Novak, CTO. And don't forget, have a look at his site all the time. There's some big updates coming from his end on the Zucoin wallet, which is impressive and unbelievable in terms of scalability again, another level. And some of the U-Boot functions you're going to see inside the Zucoin wallet to do with expiries and things that you'll be able to do that no other crypto on the planet can or ever will do. But in those discussions, the opportunity is there also that as a registered virtual asset service provider, VASP, Zutopia can also then start to spill itself into things like dealing with some big players that have other products under their custodianship. For example, maybe a group that's got a large chunk of Bitcoin, and instead of going to another exchange to buy that Bitcoin, or you won't get much of a fraction because the costs are too great. But what we can do is fractionalize fractions of Bitcoins under the supervision of a large institution, of which those fractions can be tokenized as a Zucoin and traded therefore on Zutopia because of the VASP registration, the Virtual Asset Service Provider registration. So there's some really interesting opportunities coming out of this, which we hadn't foreseen, but certainly we discussed that this morning and had a bit of a squiz about how that might operate over the weekend. And being fully compliant, fully transparent with the transfer, it could mean that these Zoo tokens or fractions of Zucoins could have a smart contract that attaches to a certain amount of value of a real Bitcoin. And therefore you can readily trade quite, because there's no cost on the Zucoin SplitChain. There's no network fees, they call that, like there is with Bitcoin. Then that lends itself to smaller players around the world buying and selling on Zutopia additional fractions of these Zucoins that then have a ownership proof of some portion of a real Bitcoin. That's a game changer, people. That is a game changer for the small guy on the street to get back in the game in terms of Bitcoin, not just the big institutions, and allows institutions to sit on pools of Bitcoin and take advantage of their treasury stockpiles to then fractionalize those to the smaller participants. So in other words, you might be able to trade back and forth a Zoo token 1 million times that represents, $1,000 value of Bitcoin. And you get the benefit of both worlds. You get the rising price on the fraction of the Zucoin, and you get the upshot on big time of the underlying value of the Bitcoin itself. So it's a double barrel. That's just one little project concept that's come out of this because we can scale. We have the firepower in SplitChain. We have the instant transferability. We have all those features that are a no-brainer now that you will not see on other cryptos. And in fact, the funny thing about that is, let's just say, for example, you're buzzing around and you've got $1,000, you've got a fraction of a Zucoin that is provable that you can show in the SplitChain it's got $1,000 worth of Bitcoin behind it. That can be fractionalized as well. And that Zucoin, because of its firepower, can be tradable directly with the merchants because they can say, oh, yeah, right, gee, we'll take this fraction of a Zucoin in exchange for a TV set or a car or house or whatever it is, because they can verify there is an underlying value of the Bitcoin underneath. So that's taking real world asset tokenization to another level, and quite properly confirming that at all along the way it's got full support of the structure of the new regime, which is managed by AUSTRAC. So if you go to that article media release, you'll see that they're very clear on it. AUSTRAC Chief Executive Officer Brendan Thomas has stated that the supervisory campaigns, which is what they've been pushing out, reflect the risk profile of the sector. AUSTRAC is checking how well crypto businesses are managing money laundering risks ahead of the new laws coming into full force. And, quote, we will continue to provide advice and guidance to assist businesses on how to comply so they are well equipped to manage their obligations. That is their AML CTF obligations. That's quite a crucial line in the media release, people, because in our past experience and where we have been in the last week, that is that is a very true reflection of that statement. They have been providing advice and guidance to Zutopia in this matter, which is very, very important. And AUSTRAC has even said that in that last week program, they've been directly dealing with 36 crypto businesses with a focus on their business models, their channels, scalability, and how effectively they're managing those risks. They also are engaging with 27 local crypto exchanges, so it's been a full-on thing, but in a very, very positive way of bringing people into this definitional structure. Now, we did have, of all of the emails, we had one which was a little touch negative there, little halfy glassy water thingy from one particular coin holder. But to his credit, acknowledging then the long term and the position, there's a difference between being frustrated by actively wanting to get in, and we're all excited about trading, and the comment that was made that, is this a joke? Well, there's nothing to joke about AUSTRAC. There's nothing to joke about ASIC for that matter. So, or any government regulatory bodies, tax office and so on. It's, Dr. Zoo over the journey has had his clashes and court cases and high level cases, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, there's always been a respect for the law, and try and get that right at the beginning and do as much as you can to put that in training, because it makes it a lot easier later on. So to the credit of this person, once they were given the full information scenario, plus the consequences and the seriousness and the penalties that have been involved in the entire structuring of money laundering globally, the comment was made that, yes, may be frustrating, but keep up the good work and it's going to be a world-class product. So to that particular individual, I take my hat off that the subjective opinion really swung 180 degrees into a objective view as to what it all means and what we're stuck with. There's nothing you can do about it except get on with it and take advantage of the outcomes that can be seriously very positive as a result of that. So now we've got a few commentaries coming through, which we now can go through. Now, first one, Peaceful Pat. Do you think there is any chance of getting the AUSTRAC license before 90 days? There is a chance. But look, we don't do the homework for AUSTRAC, as I've said. They're very strong in their advice and guidance programs as part of their mandate. They're more interested in getting solutions and people on board. They've been very good for the entire, be probably 15-year journey of easy bonds over that period, and how that's been operating and still has been with that license. But this will take it to the next license. So it's just a question of their resources, in-house staffing, and all the rest of it. They don't particularly put their hand up and say, just because you're Zutopia, we're going to give you an early response. We'll just wait and see and go through the motions on that. That doesn't stop the marketing boys doing their work. It doesn't stop the legals doing their work, and it certainly doesn't stop the devs from accelerating what they're doing. So it's just a case of getting it right, and away we go. So let's keep working in that. There's a couple of interesting sort of byproducts of this. One is it's got, in relation to the Zoo tokens, how do you stop bad actors from creating scam offerings? Look, that's always going to be difficult. In fact, that's one of the big picture items, the big ticket items that worries the hell out of AUSTRAC and other regulatory bodies around the world. It's not a very good. It's not a very good outcome for the success rate of these programs because of the way in which the global financial systems work. In fact, Dr. Zoo did a bit of homework on the weekend, and look, it was quite horrific when you look at the stats as to this money laundering issue, and you can pretty well break it down to look, a handful of scenarios that affect money laundering. You've got your naughties and you've got your not so naughties that end up being naughty. But if you think about the compliance risks and the things that have happened in these journeys, you can narrow it down that one of the bigger pictures of money laundering stems. There we go. We'll try and get rid of that. Stems from a scenario where the biggest point of what they want to check really is tax avoidance and frauds and that sort of stuff. Then you've got obviously your drug issues around the world, particularly cocaine traffic and so on. And then it spills into, they've even got obviously crypto in there at a level, but certainly that's nowhere near or great in terms of the total globalized position of how that operates. But look, the sad statistic is that it's nearly a cost globally of $300 billion a year to meet these obligations across all businesses and back through the banks, etc., in trying to put this identification and KYC. And it's got some pretty sad flaws in it, really, the way in which these processes can and do work. I mean, when you think about it, if the banks are doing their job properly and identifying the source and identifications of the customers, then it would seem absolutely extraordinary that a product like Zutopia would need to actually vet and check customers for a third time. If the bank's done its job, then you've got MasterCard and Visa as a layer in the middle of that, and then you've got Stripe on top of that, and then they're suggesting that because people are moving money from one bank account to another bank account, somehow in the middle there's this review process that needs to be reviewed by a product like Zutopia that doesn't get involved with any of the money other than taking instructions from transfer from A to B. So it's no different to a bank doing a transfer in your account directly to another BSB or account number or another international number. And in fact, both banks should be doing their job properly. You wouldn't need another layer of compliance and costs that occur on top of that. Now, the saddest statistic of all of this, despite all of this money, 300 billion a year globally, and banks and all the rest of it, and everybody participating in this, all driven by the OECD's reporting and stuff. I think the issue becomes one of it's just not working. I mean, less than 1% of laundered funds were intercepted globally as a result and picked up by these AML, KYC, CTF regimes. 1%, less than 1%. Yet the numbers are suggesting that up to $5.5 trillion has escaped the, gone through the cracks because you've got criminal elements and you've got the two big layers of tax avoidance. There's a whole lot of corporate infrastructuring that's assisted by lawyers and accounting bodies and stuff. Whether it's inadvertent or otherwise, I don't know. But nevertheless, that's putting pressure on the way in which you see the explosion of costs on trying to add more and more layers. A bit like a layer 2, people. It's a bit like if you don't get the layer 1 right in the first place, you've got Buckley's in terms of trying to sort out the problems in layer 2s, whether that's in, Bitcoin blockchain or Ethereum, any of those sort of current structures. You end up with another layer of problems on top of the first lot of problems. What you try and do is you should try and resolve the first layer problem, which is the hard yards and work that you guys have participated in. And, nothing's 100% perfect, but I tell you, we're as close to perfection as possible when you look at the scalability and security and decentralization that's been created by the processes of which we've built SplitChain, and then, of course, the tokens on top. So, look, in terms of the issue of tokens and the problems that you've just raised there, people, yes, it's difficult with bad actors because the bad actors have the same tools available that they try and impersonate things. There's what they call phishing sites and false websites and misleading information. That is an inherent problem in today's digital world. You try and remedy that by putting certain controls in place, but if you are looking to send your tokens or your Zucoins directly to somebody, you have a layer of protection in front of you that no other crypto has. You don't have to send it to some address that you may or may not what it is, but you do have the two-factor verification between you and a second party as the receiver in the Zucoin world. And that includes what you do with the process of a Zutopia transfer. So when you come back to the Zoo tokens, the good thing is that as they are a fraction representation of a real Zucoin, Zutopia can at least support the ownership proofs into the split chain 100% based on checking the chain from a seller's point of view. So if someone's selling their Zoo token, we can verify that is real on the split chain. And we can also verify that the receiver who was indicated in that transfer of Zoo tokens, whether they're tokens that relate to merchants or tokens for what I just described as Bitcoin fractions, if that's the offering, then you do have a lot. And by the way, some of those products elevate themselves that have to be regulated by local bodies. In that instance, there would be some major institution that's supporting the fractionalization of Bitcoins, as an example, or if it could be shares and securities or whatever, there would be AFSL licensing in Australia's jurisdiction and certainly other licensing in the USA and England. But that would give consumer protections on those sort of levels that at least they can, as well as the Zutopia, can verify both the sender and receiver through the split chain. That's very difficult to do when you're sending, whatever product of crypto you want to send, or an NFT, meme coin, whatever. It's very, very difficult because the way in which it's a one-way flow of that digital asset to a wallet that may be unable to be verified at the other end because it goes one way. That's really the problem with the crypto space, but that's the advantage of Zucoins. That's where we can power ahead and give that comfort. So just to just get your heads thinking about this a bit more. If you take the first cab off the rank, which we're working through, not me as in Dr. Zoo, but Dr. Zoo's son in Turfstar, he produces 40,000 tokens that have representation of a real racehorse. You will get verification of ownership and proofs of those tokens that then can be tradable as well. And that gives a greater level of certainty that you're not getting scammed, because a scammer can only offer you phony things, and they get away with it because the proofs aren't there. It's very difficult to do that. Now, an actor identity is often hijacked to spruik financial scams. That's correct, and that goes with anything really. I mean, a lot of the scams in life that we see all relate to things like processes of all sorts of product lines and things that you currently, whether you're getting a real pair of underpants on an online website, that comes back to consumer laws. You've got all sorts of U-Butte pump and dump things, not just in the crypto space, but across, some of the greatest financial collapses have happened because of scams based on listed companies that have collapsed and still being under the protection or so-called protection of the local regulators. And that goes into recently events with super funds and those sort of products that you think they're covered. Mortgage funds, all that sort of stuff have had a run, and they end up in trouble because they still can't be regulated properly. It's something that's very, very difficult to do. Now, we've got here, Popular One is indicated that if a merchant begins to sell products via Zucoin and has mass adoption, how would they pay staffs and suppliers if cash coming in decreases? Unless they sell their Zucoins, it will not create cash flow issues. The good thing is about the eventuality of a universal token of value is that you've just got to get in your mind that the current method of what we use in our day-to-day lives can swing into a value that reflects the original value, if you know what I mean. What I mean by that is that if you don't need to convert your Zucoin to fiat or a currency, Australian dollar or USD, but there is a pricing mechanism that says this is the value. It's like saying, one Aussie dollar might, or one US dollar might only give you 70 cents in Australian dollar terms. Now, no one questions how does that happen. I mean, why? Who determines that the Aussie dollar is less value than the US dollar, but we accept that as a tradable value? So if you're paying staff in America, which in fact, Dr. Zhu team here has to do payments on contractors in euros and USD, all of a sudden it's almost, in the old day, it was nearly double. So you don't get to question the mechanisms other than we say, oh, well, some group of banks in Europe have created the floating exchange rate differentials on today's date. Now, they say there's a whole lot of economic impacts that occur and, oil price goes up and that affects this country and doesn't affect that one. And therefore, there's a price mechanism adjustment on the FX rate. That scenario can happen globally with a Zucoin. In other words, there will be a rate, there'll be a value rate as to a fraction of a Zucoin, and it may be that the staff or suppliers simply take that Zucoin at that prevailing rate. So you don't need, there's no cash flow decreasing. It actually improves the cash flow because the Zucoin becomes another representation of value reflected by the trading market. And if that's trading at, $10,000 a Zucoin, then you need to pay wages of $2,000. There'll be a fraction of a Zucoin that staff say, look, I'll take the Zucoins because that's worth $2,000, that particular fraction, and they settle in Zucoins. That's not a problem. That's quite, that's quite a big scenario, in terms of getting used to the fact that the ultimate goal is about less fiat conversions for the risks and merchants and that accepting the Zucoins or fractions, because there's no fees and charges. There's no cost to a merchant in the true sense of having to rely on MasterCard or Visa or the bank system to be able to be in that position for global commerce. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about global goods and services that need to be paid for that have this huge cost to merchants. For example, there is always going to be, as we have experienced in Zutopia, a fee to the processor that's processing those card transactions, as in Stripe. Now, they have their businesses, they have their overheads, and they determine with the network, there's all sorts of fees with MasterCard and Visa, and that's the charge they've got to do. You lump it or leave it. If you don't want to pay those fees, well, then you don't use those services. But that's the cost of the network. You also have things like the merchants where there is a huge risk in accepting those cards because the system hasn't solved the 100% clarity as to chargebacks and reversals. So the merchant gets stumped with, either leaving reserves of 15% or more of every transaction in a pool to cover those costs, or they get hit hard with the monies that have to be paid when a customer reverses the transaction. So that's in the billions. That's last count was about $65 billion worth of that stuff around the world gets pinged on merchants. And then at the end of the day, you suffer as a consumer because they're going to add that cost on to the consumers. So even the AML KYC problems, if that cost on the AML jumps high, it could very well be that instead of $5 for the first transaction for a month to meet the costs for the KYC with Stripe, and if you only transact once, well, that's fine. You might only do that for the month, and it's $5. But if you're going to come back in and be a pro trader and you want to trade 24 hours a day, 7 days a week and make money and trade with all of the tokens and Zoo tokens and all that sort of stuff, well, then you're going to have to wear the cost of the $5 because they demand a bit of a refresher each month on the KYC. Now, the view and approach of the industry is clear. If you don't like it, well, you're not invited to play in the game. Just, if you're not happy to pay the price, well, you don't get to play in the game. It's pretty simple. So you've got to work that out as to Same with Bitcoin. If you want to play in the Bitcoin space today, then not only do you have the on and off ramp costs on an exchange, you take the risks with potentially the hacking, the pumps and dumps and the schemes and losing of your coins and what goes on. Your hard-earned coins can end up with a little mate over there in North Korea and his team, or you could quite easily end up that you've got to pay the miners. That's the big engines that validate the transactions and allow your entry into the ownership of the blockchain. That's what it's about. It's about confirming through these massive algorithms and computing power. They have a cost, and it's about $88,000 US in terms of Bitcoin. So if you don't want to share in that cost, that's why you will never get Bitcoin fractionalizing low enough that you will get a cup of coffee or mainstream micropayments around the world. And that's killed a lot of Bitcoin's business because it's simply there to be speculated upon and punting as to whether it goes up and down, a bit like the racetrack. You've got 10 participants in a race and one of them's going to win, and that's the speculation as to what happens. That's why they give you odds as to whether a certain horse is at 300 to 1 or 10 to 1 or 2 to 1. Or you could end up like the great Rothfire there on the weekend in the Doomden 10,000 at 60 odd to 1, pulling off a big win, and boom. So there you go. Yeah, just be aware that that's the ability of how a true globalization and reflection works if you want to bring into play all of these other product lines that come in there. So keep an eye on that. Now, a couple more here. We've got, have you got any more onboarding numbers? No, I haven't. No, they'll keep working away through that. We'll probably give more of an update through the once a month, I'd say, on that one. There's no point getting too much on that because then we haven't got any news on the AUSTRAC either. But it's going up, and we'll give another update in a couple of weeks, I'd say. I'll talk to Riley about that. But that's our mission, is to make sure that those numbers accelerate. It's not as quick as we'd hope because we're still fiddling around as per the iOS, which hasn't changed since the last update from last week. In basic terms, that copy and paste and that deep linking is still there. We haven't dropped that down much. I think it's down 1 or 1.5 percentage point on that one. So we'll just keep trying to get that down. Good one from Fortunate Earthling. Today's words of wisdom for your bankrupt mate. Abraham Lincoln, quote, "What you do today can improve all your tomorrows." Yeah, he was an amazing guy, Abraham. Don't forget that when he was killed or shot, assassinated, that his next president that took over, Ulysses S. Grant, was also became president of the United States, having fought as a great general, won the great wars, become president, and also was a bankrupt. You believe that? Yeah, he was in partnership with some Fruit Loop that had a few drinks one night and burnt one of the houses or properties they owned down, and that came out of left field, and boom, next thing he wakes up and not only was he president of the United States, but he's also bankrupt. So it's a fascinating tale. But it only reinforces one big thing, just on that topic. It just reinforces the fact that we've got to get some of the structures for asset protection in place, not just from a bankruptcy perspective, but given the updates as of last week, which is, look, it's turning out to be far more significant, this budget. Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese, it's really turning into a very huge social divide, both economically and socially, because the ramifications, I don't think enough people appreciate. Dr. Zoo's putting the warning out there. This is big. This has really got some serious drill down budget ramifications. In fact, Dr. Zoo started to piece together a thesis on how to solve the economic problems of not just Australia, but other countries that sort of could create a layer one type environment where the regulations are locked and loaded and can remove that massive billions of dollars of burden on businesses. there has been a paper produced which is on the ZuAI about fractionalizing. In this instance, we talk about Zucoins as a digital currency that can take in a small percentage clip on every transaction. And that transaction could raise well over $1.1 trillion a year, which would eradicate completely every known tax to mankind, from local councils all the way through to state governments and federal governments across the board, and could minimise around $250 billion of expenditures as a result, a direct result of that. So Dr. Zu's going to put that into a big thesis format so that there is a template for people to think about complete economic, social and fiscal reform on a scale that's never been done before. That would eliminate all company taxes. It'll trim back the tax office. Revenue would be on a cash basis for the government, not on accruals where they make up numbers over the next 4 or 5 or 10 years. They have got a cash flow basis upon which to then curtail their expenditures, and that would eliminate all individual taxes, which is 47% of the total budget revenues that comes through. Corporate taxes would change. There'd be no CGT. There would be no GST. There would be no payroll tax. There would be no land tax. There'd be no stamp duty. There would be nothing, which would have a money supply flow on our little formula we use, the quantity theory of money, that would explode this country into a full-blown aspirational aspect, rather than the concepts of taking more and more tax bracket type taxes that are a disincentive to even wanting to make any money. In fact, I laughed the other day. I saw the thousands of, one good thing about AI people, the thousands of unbelievable, mainly because we're looking at the Zucoin Facebook. The boys have been saying, look, let's just keep this once a week, bit of a sort of a speed dial, speed dating type scenario. You pop in and see Facebook, and there's very, very tight little summaries for you guys on Zutopia and Zucoins, and a industry update the boys are putting together, very front and center. And having looked at that and what's on Facebook, it was extraordinary the amount of AI generated images of Albo as the new co-founder of all these small businesses that are now finally realizing that you've got a government that, for all intents and purposes, is a 47% plus partner of every small business in the country. I mean, you have a true partnership arrangement. You can call them co-founders, you can call them what you like, partners. And this ranged from mechanic businesses through to coffee shops, through to small real estate businesses, and the businesses that keep this country going through employment, and they're paying up to their eyeballs in superannuation and taxes and all the rest of it, trying to employ people, trying to give the incentives for people to work. But the funny thing was, which is absolutely spot on, is in every image was Albo as the new co-founder of these businesses. And, he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it, but that's the harsh reality, that the Australian government, through these changes, and even in the past, doesn't matter whether you're Liberal or Labor, has become and always will be a partner, whether you like it or not, in the growth of your business without taking a single risk. They don't take any risk. These businesses are up their eyeballs in debt. They can have houses mortgaged. They take all the chances of trying to get the businesses to perform. They've got rent. They've got electricity bills. They've got all these things. And then along come these two wood ducks with no skin in the game, no capital, no investment, no nothing. And they become 40%, 47% owners. It's absolutely absurd. Absolutely absurd. So that's when Dr. Zu decided that, look, an economic thesis would be good, because it's changing the complete dynamic, that you don't care whether you're a saver or a spender. If there's an automatic 1% taken out on every transfer, it captures the corporates, because the big guns are playing the big games with trillions of dollars. There's daily references in the Reserve Bank confirming the flow of monies, both non-cash and otherwise, and that would eliminate a huge chunk, nearly 48% of the entire world's concern about money laundering, because there would be no tax avoidance. There's nothing to avoid. There's nothing. It would take a pressure off the entire system for things like court cases, bankruptcies. There's 28,000 bankruptcies a year. They would all vaporise because there's nothing to bankrupt if you don't owe any tax. You've got this 1%. You buy a house, you pay 1%. You don't need to worry about stamp duty. You get rid of GST. All that crap goes. In fact, you can fully budget on this thesis that of the surplus of monies, you could have a complete repayment of the entire Australian $1 trillion debt in 3.5 years. 3.5 years, it's gone. You then can also have annualised contributions to states for proper programs, not just these wombat tunnels that they're trying to build in Victoria, or $360 million down the toilet to games that don't exist, or giving $273 million to the Institute of Measurement for God knows what reason. I know we've got to have calibrations of things, but surely private sector can build that out without that sort of money used by government departments. Put all that together, and you've got a direction of what these blokes are supposed, or women are supposed to be doing. It's not hard. How hard can it possibly be that you've got a list of things called roads and hospitals and education, and there's a support net for people that can't support themselves? You've got a revamped NDIS that can be revamped properly, where you don't need to leave people out of the picture. You've got those sort of sectors is what expenditure should be about. And more importantly, people, every single politician should be almost personally accountable, like a company director, for the way in which they behave in relation to expenditures or appropriations from Parliament. As I said the other day, I was absolutely horrified. I met a senator, great respect for, and he's asking me, what does Section 83 of the Constitution mean? What does it mean? Well, that should be the only section that every senator focuses on. That's the section that says the Senate has to approve the appropriation of money for the expenditure by government. I mean, how much more important can a section be? If the Senate don't approve it, it's illegal. The expenditures are void, illegal. It's called the Auckland Harbour case. The Auckland Harbour case, people. There was 128 breaches last year of Section 83. No one cares. This is the problem with the overriding fact of how they drive more and more pressure on businesses and people to pay more and more taxes. And that's what's brought down many a great empire. Rome, boom, too much taxes. Why do you think the great United States of America 250 years ago split with England? Taxes. Every time there's a common theme, taxes. You bleed people to death, and this is what happens. They get annoyed. They get worked up. You can't cope with this so-called housing pretext, but you let 1 million people wander in because you don't look after the locals. This is called taxes. I mean, Jimbo's concept of raising taxes on capital gains tax, which affects now all your shares and your crypto, and there's a lot of work we're doing behind the scenes to see how that's going to pan out, because you are going to be affected by a massive price rise in your crypto, and you are going to be in such a state that Albo now is a partner in your business of owning Zucoins, whether you like it or not. You've got a new co-founder. So you've taken the risk. You've put up with all the timeline and the delays. You've put up with it. You see the price rise. And lurking in the shadows out there is Jimbo and Albo. They're your new partners. It's okay to pay tax, don't get me wrong, but it's got to be fair and equitable, and it's got to be used in a prudent way. They've got to be expending. The last round of excitement was amazing. $4 billion in pink bats. How good was that? Or the Liberal Party, boats that don't float, submarines that don't like water, $65 billion. I mean, who unleashes these people? Liberal, Labor, it doesn't matter. And that's your tax regime. So there's going to be some solutions down the road. And again, coming back to where all this started, is that it affects you as Zucoin holders in relation to your personal holdings for tax purposes now moving forward. There's got to be some great planning between now and the 1st of July 2027. You've now got negative gearing issues on where you put some money. What the hell do you do with it? You go and borrow against it, and you can't claim anything. And yet they want to increase housing. Well, they've just trimmed back people's excitement about buying more properties. It's not like you live in 10 houses. You might own 9 or 10, but ownership doesn't mean to say you're any better off. If you're renting, you don't have all the headaches. Good God, what the repair costs on houses and buildings and maintenance, it's mind-blowing. You don't wake up one morning and it's all happy land. So this is the spill-on effect. And what was interesting, now this is a real radical here. This is Dr. Zhu's most radicalist concept of all. The other big chunk of these problems globally is the cocaine trade. Now, Dr. Zhu hasn't had any of the white stuff. There's many people he knows that have and do still have it. But there's a reason there's supply and demand. There's a reason there is massive flow-on effect of this money that's being laundered. Remember, I just said the regulators seem to be only capture less than 1% of the total illicit trade of money laundering, and yet there's 5.5 trillion missing between tax and drugs. So Dr. Zhu decided to watch a couple of shows on the mafia. I mean, what a number. I mean, they're capturing a few. They lock up 200 or 300 of the wombats here and there. But there always seems to be this massive flow around the world and no shortage of these illicit drugs, which then convert into problems because you try and stop it. You've got enforcements and all the rest. At the end of the day, if you're stupid enough to take the stuff, you end up crook. Now, maybe, not suggesting this is the ultimate solution here, but maybe there's more control on educating people and looking at the health consequences and just legalise the stuff. Because that would take it outside of, if you've got a control systems in terms of digitised fractions of currency that has a 1% charge, then all of a sudden black money market gets into play. All of a sudden you don't need cash, so that's another level of market. Because why would you avoid anything if you're paying 1%? Who cares? And if you want to run a stupid business called drug trafficking, well, keep a control on it through proper regulation as a normal product. I mean, you can go and buy boxes of Panadol and see how that works out. We've got enough problems with all the so-called approved drugs, let alone the other stuff. So maybe there's more research in that regard. Just throw it out there. And maybe that financial system control puts pressure on less crime, less issues, except health at the end of the day of the idiots that take the stuff. You can tell people a million times over, don't go and smoke because it's not good for you. But people smoke. I mean, there's the drug. And now what do? Government says the answer to that is increase the taxes on the tobacco. And what do we end up with? Shops blown up in Melbourne. There's a tobacco war. The mentality is crazy. So if you make it accessible and you want to smoke till you're dead as a dodo, well, smoke the bloody stuff. But don't put the tax as an excuse and as an imposition, which then causes all these side effects of creating an illegal illegal tobacco war, which then affects everybody else. So that's not the answer. Same with alcohol. If you want to drink yourself stupid, knock yourself out. We all have a drink. It's been around for centuries, wine and alcohol and all the rest of it. But educate people then, or younger ones, about moderation as well. It's the same stuff. The moment you go and tax the stuff, it doesn't mean that it drops. All it means is there's another round of big taxes and they go and blow that on something else because the tax regime is stuffed. You end up with more Albo partners. Albo becomes the greatest co-founder in living memory, in history. Him and Jimbo, the greatest co-founders of the greatest number of businesses are those two rabbits because of these tax changes. And it's mind-blowing, mind-blowing. So we take our little piece of history, a little chunk, and we start small. We've created an extraordinary concept of ownership proofs, which is SplitChain and Zucoins, and we roll that into a regulatory component, which is Zutopia, gives us global comfort on what's going on, and there'll be tweaks. AUSTRAC might want even more tightening than what we're suggesting. Well, so be it. The biggest losers are those that have to come into the systems because you want to be a good person and you want to be in that position so that you, the person, complies with the law. If you're going to be naughty, you're going to get your ass in a sling and you're going to get caught out. Now, let's just have a think about some of the naughties. You think about the concept. Now, Dr. Zoo, only recently, as in Friday, did a $500 transfer from the bank. Nothing too innocuous, nothing too concerning, just a $500 transfer. And it was paid to another party, won't disclose who, but it was an equestrian body, in relation to the great alligator blood, the horse, supporting one of his mates from way back, Roscoe, who's doing rehab riding for young kids. Right, $500. That's not a bit. I mean, in fact, it's twice as much as Albo and Jimbo are going to pay the $250. But this is just the one party. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, because the reference said alligator blood, right? So think about it: $500 shooting itself off into mystery land to this equestrian person to represent sponsorship by alligator blood, the horse, to his mate Roscoe, who'd been living with him and living the dream as racehorses, and they don't have any problems. As I said once before, you got this inquiry now into alligator blood. It's in its 6th year, right? This is the 4th inquiry that's come up for alligator blood on his Altrenogus, which is the most absurd, ridiculous concept on the planet, that a horse is going to have a fertility drug. He's a gelding, right? Doesn't help anything. Anyway, that's been ongoing, and we've had some big successes, and we're also now leading into this next round of inquiry. And I'll just make this point. It's all about the structures, the regulations, and the integrities of these systems and how they fall apart. Now, in the alligator blood inquiry, Blind Freddy can do a search on anybody. Dr. Zoo is all over the place because he talks about everything he's had bad in his past. There's no more skeletons out there. I mean, it's a shame because maybe Dr. Zoo would have entertained some of more sex scandals over the years, but he hasn't been involved in that. But that might have been a bit of spice to the old story rather than just boring old bankruptcy and fighting the government for 26 years. So one of the appointees, this is public knowledge, to this new panel, is a bloke called John Zucoin. Can you believe that? Zucoin. Very highly reputable, not throwing any, casting any, aspersions on him. And he's on the panel. He's a good bloke. And it turns out, you just do a little search on Johnny Zucoin, and it turns out, there's conjecture about how naughty he was back in 2011. He drives a car, has a crash, nothing untoward in that. And then, it comes out later that he may or may not have been on the grog. Come back to the old tax on grog, right? Everybody does their own thing. And what happens? 2 weeks later, he fesses up. That was him in the crash. Not going to fess up to the alcohol side of it, but he resigns from all his positions, including chairman of the stewards and integrity of all of WA racing. Now, that's not Dr. Zoo saying that. You can look it up. Boom, front page. He's on there with the Australian, the West Australian, and the Sydney Morning Herald and the ABC. This reputable guy likes to have a drink and drive, allegedly. But the point is, he's left the scene of a crime. That is a crime. Now, he wants to have the integrity to sit on a panel to judge the alligator blood case. Well, he can't do that. He's been naughty. You can't have that sort of naughty person saying to someone else, I think that you're naughty because I'm not going to tell everybody I'm naughty. And that was how, the first couple of blokes got the result from these panels. I think the first panel bloke was a bit naughty with his sexual drive in New Zealand at the time. And the next bloke, he wasn't very good because he was getting tangled up with Dr. Zoo in the manning yards. So that wasn't good. Now we've got this third bloke. So what does all this mean? Well, it all comes back to what is the purposes of these regulations at state and federal levels and how they impact upon the end result, you, the consumer, us, alligator blood. And in this instance, you've now got a body that's saying, because of KYC and AML that a $500 transfer, somehow with the words alligator blood on it, is one of the greatest suspicious transaction fines that this bank's ever found. More importantly, they've identified a $500 transaction, but they can't identify $5.5 trillion of transfers through drugs and tax avoidance and everything else going on the planet, less than 1% success. But they can pinpoint alligator blood's name in a $500 transfer and close the account down until it's investigated and the transaction being suspended. You believe that? This is the financial craziness of the world. Now, you'd think the bank would have done its homework in the first place. You would think the bank knows it's going to another account where there's an equestrian name there. It's not, Colombian equestrian. It's a local bank. And you'd think that the due diligence process would put the bank in box seat to know what the hell it's doing, because they're spending tens of millions of dollars of shareholders' money, which comes back to, guess what? Pensioners' money, super funds, your hard-earned money. You've taken the risk, you bought some shares, you've done all that in the banks, and they use shareholder money to meet the obligations of the bank, to satisfy a regulatory body that laws like what we've just seen come out and talking about, the two words put in there called, making arrangements into the AML Act, because some dimwit called David Pocock as an independent and Jackie Lambie don't bother reading the Act and pass the legislation. This is what we're up against. Wouldn't have a bloody clue how to read an Act. You've got another senator that doesn't understand what Section 83 is, and he doesn't give a stuff. In that instance, the Liberals tried to warn us of a 10-year cost of compliance to businesses of $13.4 billion. No one cares about that. No one gives a rat's ass. And here we have this $500 transaction that has to be explained, that this horse is very much a famous, if not legendary, horse in Australia. It's a family pet now, sitting out in the paddock having a great time. And yet he's subject to an investigation by an integrity body where the bloke goes drink driving, allegedly, leaves the scene of a crime, allegedly, who wants to be on the panel to determine his fate, where at least 1.7 million with interest is at jeopardy in terms of non-payment, plus another 6 million on top of that for damages for alligator blood not running in the Everest. Prejudged by these people, and the systems aren't in place. I mean, how hard would have it been to appoint either the bloke on the panel to look up his background, or the banks to sit there and say, we're doing our job under the AML KYC? And Zutopia puts it now, it's mind-blowing. But then you look at the bank, or two banks in particular, and you see that in 2020, Westpac, the great Westpac, it's on the website, Zucoins.com. This is factual information. This is not made up. Cops a $1.3 billion fine. So shareholders' money travels across the ether, ends up in Jimbo's account. Well, that stage it was the Liberal Party. It might have been just 2020. Ends up in the government's coffers. They go and give it to the wombats in Victoria, lose it. They put it in ridiculous, things like, as I said earlier, 65 billion in submarines that don't like water. What a concept that was. Or pink bats earlier than that, and all the rest of it. And there's a flow of wealth. The government has succeeded in stealing your wealth because of this legislative problem, because the bank, get out of this, failed to report $19.5 million of transfers. 19.5, that's not dollars. Let me start again. Dr. Zoo needs to be corrected. Westpac failed to report 19.5 million transfers of suspicious transfers. 19.5 million. I mean, the mind boggles. It's mind-blowing. For a $1.3 billion screw-up of people's wealth. And this is why Albo and Jimbo today can safely put their hand up and say they are the new co-founders of nearly every business in Australia. Who would want to, in their right brain, take a risk? Unfortunately, all of us Zucoin holders are now caught up in this new co-founder web trap, because that those wombats are now our partners. They don't take any risks. They don't care. They don't give us stuff, but they're our partners. Now, if they were true partners, they'd be taking risks, but there's nothing there. Not a thing. Sit back, relax, go through Albo should be ringing up AUSTRAC and giving approval tomorrow. They're the ones that pass this ridiculous this stuff where they've got less than 1% success rate. But we've got to be compliant, just like the inquiry into alligator blood. They should have vetted the bloke before he started. Look at the fools down there in Victorian racing on the weekend. They appoint a vet on Friday and they sack him on the Monday because it turns out there's a report that he may or may not have been abusive and wanted to kill somebody that was on the boards of the racing clubs. This is the vet. Surely they could have checked that in 2018. But no, we all go down this vortex. We get caught up in this stuff because they don't do the homework in the first place. And it's the same, exactly the same as what happened with CBA. They've admitted to criminal breaches of the law because they were charging dead people. That went well. Then they breached the AML Act and they paid in 2018 a $700 million fine because they had 53,000 breaches. But you know what's interesting? You can go through the list of these banks and corporations, including Crown Resorts copped a $450 million fine in 2023. Danske Bank copped a $2 billion fine in 2022. Deutsche Bank copped $630 million fine. Binance copped a $4.3 billion fine, being naughty. TD Bank, $3.09 billion. This is a transfer of wealth. It's not the bank's money. It's not the exchange's money. It's shareholders' wealth, which then you're expected to pay on top of that capital gains now. It's the most ludicrous concept ever invented by mankind. So these fines are growing, getting worse. The cost of compliance is getting worse because there is no concept of reform. Jimbo's idea of reform is to increase the taxes on the CGT, steal that from people, and bang that into a $250 bonus bet of $6.4 billion going out the door. To what? $250. The great lesson of COVID was the thousands of dollars people got up front. What they did is they drank themselves stupid, went to the pokies, and played more on the bets. What a concept that was. Or bought some TV sets. Fantastic. So we need to do more preparation, people. Dr. Zoo's doing a lot more work behind the scenes to prepare us for battle because with the entry of these new partners, Albo and Jimbo, it's going to be a rough ride. We get to the point, we see some big bucks and we hand it to our partners. Now, there are all sorts of strategies quite legally and proper that we're circling around looking at, things like tax deferral. If it's good enough for Jimbo to fix up and stuff up testamentary trusts so that there's a wealth tax by stealth, you don't even get to control who gets your wealth through those trust structures. It's not a fixed trust. You're dead as a dodo. You think your money's going to, 5 of your own kids and 3 others that you found that you had with someone else, and you can't even give it to them. What an absurdity, because he's going to sit there with his tax, 30% on trusts now and all the rest of it. There could have been an easy solution to this crap about young generation not getting entry into housing. Now, I haven't thought this through properly. I'll finish on this note, but for the young ones out there, and let me say, the harder the older generation have bust their ass to get wealth, you're now going to be the biggest losers because it's going to go straight to Jimbo and Albo. If you'd have sat back and said nothing, instead of whinging about it, you'd have got your inheritance. Would have been sitting there sweet. You can spend it, lose it, whatever you want to do with it. Mum and Dad don't care. They're dead as a dodo. But anyway, you buggered that now. But there could have been an easy housing solution. One is obviously immigration's got to be curtailed. There's no question. No question. That's just absolute stupidity. Bringing in another million new people coming in for what? So the rest of us can't sort out the housing problem. That's the first thing. The second, you could have incentivised the young people that maybe if you're under a certain age of 30, not only do you get the 5%, deposit and the assistance from the government on your building of a new house, but guess what? Why not make that bunch tax-free? I mean, what a concept. If the government doesn't need to raise more money to lose on green bats and pink bats and all these ridiculous concepts that they've got, killing all the koala bears because power lines have got to go in that don't work with the old electricity. If they're going to do that, what they could have done is said to the young people, listen, you want a home? We'll give you exclusively, because they're only talking 70,000 homes, for God's sake. We will give you exclusively the greatest tax benefit that the boomers don't even get to sniff at. What's that? Well, you buy an investment property and there is no tax exactly the same as though it was your own residence. So 2 for the price of 1. Encourage them that they are the only ones that get their tax-free home. And second, create an investment strategy. If you're under 30, boom, you get to play the game and you get a complete free ride on CGT. Completely. You pay nothing if that's the second property you've got, and that'll expand the growth of the housing market. Have a think about it. Have a think about what we're going through. So that's a little chit-chat today, people. Little chit-chat about everything there. Good news is we're starting to really warm up to, on the one hand, getting excited about government changing the goalposts and pulling Zutopia into this registration. As I said, 2 outcomes. They might come back and say you don't need to be because it's just the ridiculous concept of everybody playing with everybody's ID. And be careful of that too, by the way. That's going to get ugly. That's going to get ugly, ugly, ugly. The moment you hand over anything to the government, I can assure you, if anybody wants to go to the website and have a look at the 1999 report from Ernst & Young as to how our great bureaucrats in the Department of Finance were sharing passwords with direct access into the Reserve Bank, then just be careful because they have got no control over anything in terms of your privacy and your protections. Not interested in that. That flew out the door when all these other regulations and purported stuff started. The pretense of worrying about under 16-year-olds, when really, in fact, they were more worried about over 16-year-olds being trackable and all the rest of it, and ending up, people, like the $500 transfer that was shot to bits because the word alligator blood was written on it, was absolutely absurd that got caught, and yet there we go. The mafia out of Sicily can still send over billions of dollars a week and not one iota about where the hell it came from or where it's going and all the rest of it. Absolute joke. So we sit on and pride ourselves with creating a very, very structured and regulated product that also has the elements of privacy and the ability for people to have their sovereign control. That's what it's about, sovereign control, and yet be fully compliant, because you can put your hand up and say, okay, I don't like it, but me little mate, ring him up, Albo, he's my new co-founder of this new business called Zucoins, and the future of how that's going to work, because he's there whether you like it or not, which is sad. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll deep dive into it. We'll get some numbers on the updates next week. No real rush on that at this stage, but the boys haven't stopped working on all fronts. Our mission statement hasn't changed. If you haven't had a look, ZuVision, Article 31, you will get an Article 32 in the next few days, which recaps on the AUSTRAC and how that's working, just for reference on the website. We've been asked a huge amount of questions on that, which has been fantastic. We've had some people that have requested I think four people have requested the registration application that went to AUSTRAC. We have no problems in that being put out. The attachments, though, have been withheld because they've got some pretty nice, juicy, confidential bits on the flow engines and the processes within the back end of Zutopia. So we've shared that with government, and that's there, but you can certainly get the registration and get the gist of how we see Zutopia fitting into that. And ironically, the pendulum is swinging more to Dr. Zoo favouring being registered Either way, it doesn't matter, but he gets to save a few bob the other way. But if the cost has to come in, there is certainly a massive upside with being fully blown registered as a virtual asset service provider that gives some incredible excitement to the future products, which I just mentioned. One taste of that being fractionalization of Bitcoins under the control of the correct and proper licensed authorities in the sense of the financial institutions. That lends itself to the transmission of fractions of Zucoins on a scale that the retail sector wouldn't have even dreamed about, because it's harder and harder to get into that space, but that could be facilitated with the firepower of Zucoins. And on that note, amazing mind, you're spot on. It's difficult, no way to encourage the average Aussie to work harder because you're penalised, and that's exactly the problem. That is exactly the stupidity, because we feed a collection, a gaggle of bureaucrats that have no experience, have no control or accountability on what they do. They just sit in that chamber, Senate and the House of Reps, and think they're protected. If they were company directors, 90% of them would have been jailed by now because of what they've done to not just taxpayers' money, but in the sense of comparing it with shareholder funds, would not have lasted one iota on running this great corporation called Australia. There needs to be some fundamental change. Let's see what we can do to that. But I'll finish on that note, everybody. Cheerio. Look forward to Thursday. Got some really nice topics coming up on that front. We will always keep you up to speed as soon as we hear anything that comes back in from the AUSTRAC and how we're going with the green button in preparation for that as well. Cheers, everybody.